So I think we will start our next session now. After a very, very invigorating and active session, that is session 2, we now go to the technical session 3. And we welcome all of you to our session on enlarging the realm of crafts and ICH education. Heritage education is increasingly becoming an important area of interest globally because young generations are remaining more and more disconnected from their own cultural heritage and their identity. And this is also happening because of the globalization and the increasing homogenization of cultures. This is exactly what we have also been hearing in our previous session, where we talked about market, and the sessions yesterday, where we talked about how to strengthen creative economy and the whole idea of bringing in creative entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship. So if these are the interest areas, then youth need to be engaged, and all those put together, this area is becoming extremely important, both in the academia and the practitioner world. So with that, I will like to invite our moderator for this panel, Dr. Neel Kamal Chakagan, and I would like to introduce him. Dr. Neel Kamal Chapagain is an architect and heritage professional from Nepal, currently an associate professor and the director of the Center for Heritage Management at Ahmedabad University in India. He has been instrumental in designing and running the master's degree program in heritage management at Ahmedabad University. He is an executive committee member at the Asian Academy of Heritage Management, a bureau member at the Asia Pacific Higher Education Network for Intangible Cultural Heritage, as well as an executive committee member at the Association of Critical Heritage Studies. He has a PhD from the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, an architect doctorate and a graduate certificate in historic preservation from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. I invite Dr. Neel Kamal. Dr. Neel Kamal, over to you to start this session.
Thank you, Madhura. Hello, everybody. It is an honor to be here with you in this panel. So thanks to banglanatak.com and ICHCAP and all the colleagues who are organizing this wonderful conversation since yesterday. This session is about expanding the realms of crafts and ICH education, which, as Madhura mentioned, is a continuation of what has been being discussed since yesterday. So in that light, I'm pleased that this aspect also has been touched upon. As Madhura introduced me, I am somehow involved in heritage education broadly, and we also have a specific focus on ICH education. So I'm also very keen, and I would like to thank the organizers for this opportunity. Just to a brief comment as a way to start the session, I think education needs to be thought of as a multiple way process. It's not just about somebody going and teaching another person or another group. I think education has the potential to learn, relearn, and learn in multiple directions. So, and particularly related to ICH, since it is about communities, the community's knowledge repository. While teaching about ICH, my own experience has been that the so-called teacher also has an opportunity to learn so much from the other side, whether it's community or the young students or the fellow professionals in the way of capacity building kind of education programs. So I am expecting a multidimensional conversation in this panel. So since we have a really interesting panel put together, I would not like to take much of a time. Rather, I would jump onto the session. So we have two set of conversations here. One is on the case studies presentations by 4 of our speakers, and the second set will be 4 discussants who will be commenting and sharing their own experience as well. And I am not going to introduce them myself. I'll rather I will request each of the panelists, I will call them and I will request them to introduce. So let us begin by a round of introduction. I would like to invite Mr. Navin Piplani first who is the Principal Director, INTACH Heritage Academy in India. So Navin, if you could kindly introduce yourself so that we are in the context.
Thank you. Good evening and good afternoon and good morning, depending on the time zone. I am Navin Piplani, trained conservation architect from the University of York, UK. Have done extensive work in heritage conservation in the UK, in India, and some parts of Europe. One of the flagship projects really has been the conservation of Taj Mahal and its environs, which brought me closer to the aspect of craftsmanship, looking at those traditional craftsmen working at site. Since 2004, I have been involved in teaching in India and abroad. I became the director of the master's program at York University for 5 years, then came back, set up the INTACH Heritage Academy. And for those of us who are who know a little less, INTACH is the Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage, where I head the academy for training, research, and capacity building on all aspects of heritage conservation. And I think as we go along and through the presentation, you will get to know a little bit more about myself. I am also the president of the ICOMOS India National Committee. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Navin. That's really wonderful. So we look forward to your presentation later on. At this point, I would request Ms. Rinzin Dorji from Bhutan, the Executive Director of Royal Textile Academy of Bhutan, to give us a brief background about herself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rinzin Dorji, and I am the Executive Director at the RTA, Royal Textile Academy of Bhutan. I have been working here ever since it first started. And so for the most part, we were busy building the infrastructure. But of course, alongside, we did start a few of our programs. And I'm very excited to be part of this very interesting and very informative meeting to talk about what we are doing here at, in Bhutan to preserve and promote our culture, and also what we're doing to include the youth in our endeavor, because I think it's very important to have youth participation in the type of work we do. So I look forward to speaking a few minutes later. Thank you.
Thank you, Rinzin. Now, may I request Dr. Pushpalatha to give a brief introduction?
Yeah, am I audible, sir?
Yes, you are, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Dr. Pushpalatha, Associate Professor, Department of Zoology, University of Calicut, in my profession. And on my passion, I have been there in working for indigenous education. And we have established a center here in Wayanad district as Institute of Tribal Studies and Research. For there, I am the founder director and working for the last 7 years. And now I have another assignment as chairholder. We have established a new chair in the campus, the UNESCO chair on Indigenous Cultural Heritage and Sustainable Development, that we have signed last month, August 2021. And I'm working in that. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pushpalatha. And now may I request Mr. Talha Ali Kushvaha to introduce himself from Pakistan. Okay, I hope we'll catch up with him. I don't see him on the screen at the moment. So what I would suggest is maybe we start with the case studies presentations, and then we'll go to the second part where I will then introduce the discussants at that point. So may I request Navin to begin his presentation. And the presentations would be for 8 minutes. So if you could kindly keep in mind the time limit as well. Navin, over to you.
Sure, I'm going to quickly share my screen. Great. So without getting into too much of background, I would just say that this is the material. The presentation is based on the material that we use for our education purposes at the INTACH Heritage Academy when we talk about creative economy specifically. in relation to sustainable development, craftsmanship, intangible cultural heritage. I want to make a little bit of a distinction, at the beginning, that I think UNESCO created a little bit of a problem for all of us, that they had the convention for the tangible and the built heritage, and they had another convention for the intangible. And so now, in context like ours, where we see the two together, it becomes rather difficult to, kind of bring them, try and bring them together at every point in time, so that it doesn't get divorced as a way of moving ahead. So that's the caveat I just wanted to place, that we are always trying to make connections, though in our original Southeast Asian, South Asia context, it was never separate. Tangible and there was nothing like intangible. Tangible had the intangible, and intangible was manifested. So problem there. Anyway, now it all began at the ASEF experts meeting, which is Asia Europe Foundation in Myanmar in 2018. That at a meeting which wished to discuss heritage-led urban revitalization, economic benefits, and beyond good practices from Asia and Europe, where we had presented the case from India, Pushkar, the historic town of Pushkar, where these aspects were discussed in great length. And again, I think in 2013 we were perhaps at the same juncture as we see ourselves today. And I'm not going to show that presentation, but just going to say that the key recommendation that came out of the presentation was the establishment of an Asia-Europe experts network, which would focus on revitalization of urban heritage areas to generate or regenerate creative economy. So it was very much focused there. And INTACH would be the hub or the secretariat for first few years for this network, which would bring together about 50 countries between Asia and Europe to look at creative economy as a source to bring together the various aspects of heritage, including development. Finally, the network was set up in 2013 with the support of Europa Nostra, INTACH, International Institute for the Inclusive Museum, International National Trust Organizations, INTO, and the Yangon Heritage Trust. So it was a network of all these founding partners, and ASEF provided initially some of the financial support for the network to move forward. This is how it was termed, and its mission was to design imaginative ways to integrate knowledge, culture, creativity, and technology to offer solutions for local communities, thereby enhancing and sustaining heritage-linked local economies for a long-term future. The emphasis is on heritage-linked. The network is an interdisciplinary approach to address the issues of livelihood, cohesion, social welfare, local economy, sustainable management, and traditional craft skills, and to design creative ways to generate economic opportunities linked to cultural assets. Now, this sounds very ideal kind of a format, but when you go to the sites, and I'm going to be talking about heritage sites, being my background, especially when you go to World Heritage Sites, all of this kind of seems to fall apart. And then one has to really, as a management strategy, bring them together. And that was the focus of the presentation at the next conference, which happened later on in Buyo in South Korea, on local communities' involvement in World Heritage Sites. Now, this network was set up in response to a specific call by Asian and European ministers of culture at the 5th Culture Ministers meeting of ASEM in 2012. So you see, there's always been also a policy level interest in this kind of work to bring together, to bridge the gap. The vision of the network was to create a whole new paradigm for urban regeneration and revitalization of heritage cities and towns by placing creative economy at the core. And the image that you see is Badami, such a beautiful, wonderful town, hardly given any importance in the various discussions that we have. So it was to bring such towns back into the limelight and place local economy and link it to heritage and make the lives of people sustainable and so moving forward. Yeah. So I'm not going to get into, but this is because it's a teaching material. we do talk about what is heritage. And the last line says heritage could be tangible, intangible, and living in inverted commas. And the emphasis always, I think, in our part of the context has been that living is really what connects the tangible and the intangible. What is local economy? Local economy is the economy that is generated and regulated at local level. And in this particular network, we are trying to link local economy with artisans, craftspeople, designers, managers, guides, souvenir sellers, and shops around heritage sites, photographers even, local transport providers, the rickshaw pullers. They also need to have a contribution to the local economy, especially when they are next to a heritage site. Livelihood is the means of securing the necessities of life, and we need to focus on livelihoods when we are talking about creative economies and local economies and heritage linked, because a person like flower seller is way down the chain, economic chain, but has a huge spiritual, intellectual, spiritual, religious, sacred contribution to make, because you would always carry flowers with you when you're visiting a shrine. Now, so people like that who are way down the ladder. Now, the approach that we are proposing is an integrated, holistic, and sustainable approach for development, which can be provided by interlinking these three aspects of heritage, local economy, and livelihoods. It's not rocket science, it's not something new, but it needs to be emphasized and brought back into the limelight again and again. Now, this approach, the creative economy approach that we were proposing and pushing for through the network, is being projected as an imaginative and inclusive tool for sustainable development of ICH. It is not, say, to rehash the existing material, but innovation would be key, imagination would be key, and imagination in not only reinventing products or reinventing cultural expressions, but looking at integration of traditional knowledge, integration of culture, integration of creativity, integration of technology through the lens of creative economy. So creative can also be, design-oriented creativity, but one has to also look at the policies and how can you creatively engage different policies and, kind of link and connect one policy to another for the benefit of the people and the site. First thing that we did was there was a lot of dust around the definitions, because people tended to interchangeably use cultural industries, creative economy, cultural economy. These terms were being used interchangeably. So the first task of the network was to kind of identify what does cultural industry exactly mean, what does creative industry exactly mean, what does creative economy exactly mean, and what would cultural economy exactly mean. I'm not going into the definitions, but
Navin, sorry to interrupt, if we may wrap up. Yeah, for the time.
Yeah. So the several models were looked at in order to get to these various aspects of creative economy, and then one had to identify a framework, which was firstly, of course, identification, SWOT analysis, and weaknesses, and we all know that, and also place heritage at the core of this entire process. And then there were economies directly linked to heritage, economies indirectly linked to heritage, and the rest of the economy. So all these had to be looked at in totality or in integrated format, and then develop capacity building programs for policymakers. So here is Archaeological Survey of India, state departments of archaeology, local communities in various parts of the country. And these are some of the cities that we took, Agra, Jaipur, Sanganer, Bagru, Chanderi, etc., worked with all these people and mapped the various aspects of creative economies, which were linked to heritage. So not to forget, the focus was always on heritage, especially in Varanasi, where we used this concept to offer solutions to provide better infrastructure, revival of intangible cultural traditions, not heritage, improvement to the living aspects, providing enabling conditions, improve streets and pavements on which these people were living and selling their products, provide interactive sessions, workshops, etc. Adaptive reuse of historic buildings came as a very important tool when you're looking at creative economy and the cultural creative industry. Integration of cultural knowledge, local history, and so on, creating social interactive spaces, incentives to private homeowners, The idea was that people who live, work around heritage sites should not feel penalized. They should take pride in that fact. This is a chart. We are all very aware of all this, but one of the interesting things that came about that all these people then came to INTACH for brainstorming sessions, and it was a 2-year-long project which developed into various aspects, which created a lot of reading material and textual material, which is available in the form of this publication, which is available with us at INTACH. So if anyone would want to see how did we go about it and what did we actually do with this approach between Asia and Europe, and if anyone would like to have, we can send it across at no cost, if the cost is not too much. This is my final slide, just to say that the entire process has been encapsulated in also a publication that came as a result of the 2-year-long project. And we can discuss some other aspects as we go along. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Navin. From the dilemma of the tangible and intangible classifications to the employment of creative economic framework to achieve a kind of an education at the local level using a global network. That was really wonderful to hear. Now let us go to Bhutan, to Rinzin Dorji for her experience on that. Rinzin, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Chakagan, and good afternoon again. I would first like to thank ICHCAP and Banglanatak.com, for this privilege to be a part of this meeting, to talk about RTA, what we are doing to support our arts and our efforts to ensure its continuity. Weaving is an integral component of the culture and traditions of Bhutan. The royal patron of the RTA, Her Majesty the Queen Mother, Sangitchern Wangchuk, said, and I quote, "Handlooms play an important role in Bhutanese society. They are a part of our culture and are of great economic significance to many of our people," unquote. For generations, young girls were trained in the art of weaving from an early age. It was a skill passed down from mother to daughter in an informal setting of a home. But as development set in and rural life gradually evolved towards urbanization, many mothers were no longer able to teach their daughters the art of weaving. Children were now attending schools full-time, leading to a slow decline in the oral transmission of knowledge. It had now become imperative for institutions and organizations to develop and implement programs so as to ensure that the art survives into the future. It was with this concern that Her Majesty established the RTA as a registered not-for-profit organization in 2005, with the primary aim to revive and cultivate interest in the weaving art form as a viable income-generating activity, to ensure that it is valued and celebrated, and that it continued by facilitating knowledge transmission to the younger generation. To this end, the RTA includes a textile museum and a weaving center. The museum collects, documents, and showcases the old textile traditions, and exhibitions are held both within the country and internationally. The Weaving Center offers a long-term opportunity for self-sustainment through its trainings on the traditional art of weaving. But at the same time, it also encourages innovation and development of new cultural expressions so as to recapitalize our heritage and keep it relevant for the younger generation. As it has been said before by Johan Huizinga, if we are to preserve culture, we must continue to create it. For the sustainability of our programs, we have constructed professionally designed office spaces for rent. The income from this investment is used entirely to support our annual programs. In our effort to enlarge the realm of crafts and ICH education, various programs are organized. A permanent textile exhibition that gives visitors an overview of our textile heritage, an annual thematic exhibition on textiles, and at least 3 exhibitions a year that focuses on other crafts. Conservation works on textiles are carried out continuously at the Conservation Center in the museum. These pieces are used not only for exhibitions, but also as resources for research. While we saw a number of foreigners visiting the RTA, we found that there were not many local people. Museum culture is relatively new in Bhutan, and so we decided to send written invitations to all the local schools. The number of school visits increased gradually, and in 2019, schools actually started approaching us to organize a visit to the museum and the Weaving Center. This is a significant development. We even have schools from outside Thimphu scheduling field trips to the RTA. Exhibitions are an excellent way to engage our youth to appreciate and understand our cultural heritage. 2 weaving courses are held annually at the Weaving Center for students with various levels of skills. If the applicants do not meet our criteria, we explore ways and means by which they can be included in the program. Dyeing trainings are held in weaving clusters around the country so as to teach better and more efficient methods. Textile purchase programs in these clusters have also been organized to support their work and to encourage them to continue. A nationwide competition is held every year to recognize, promote, and reward expert artisans in 5 of our 13 traditional arts. Attractive prizes are awarded to them, in addition to a major publicity campaign for the winners. Fashion presentations are held in Thimphu, which is attractive not only to designers, but aspiring models too. A product development course is held to encourage designers to innovate and build onto our textile heritage. A design resource center is being established at the RTA for the youth designers. Such programs have been effective in bringing artisans to the fore. They have given us a platform to interact with the artisans, to understand their experiences and difficulties, to render support where possible, and to encourage them to continue their work. Moreover, programs like the fashion shows, product development trainings, and the Design Resource Center have engaged local youth because such activities generally appeal to them. A criteria to take part in such programs is a requirement to use our textiles, which then gradually exposes participants to information on our weaving culture. It is through such activities that we hope the youth will develop an interest in our culture and traditions. Youth are the future of Bhutan, and it is the youth that will take our heritage forward to the next generation. And in our experiences, we have understood one thing, that in order to engage them in our mission to preserve and promote our heritage, we will have to reach out to them through programs that are designed to attract them. We also work with museums and institutions outside Bhutan to organize exhibitions and seminars in our effort to create awareness on our cultural arts internationally. We have had events in the US, Germany, the Czech Republic, Switzerland, and India. Recently, we have initiated a nationwide survey on textiles with the objective to update the information available, to understand the status of the textile sector in Bhutan, to serve as a basis to forecast and guide the formulation of appropriate programs for the overall development of the sector, and to establish a repository of empirical knowledge and resources related to textiles and design. Also included in the survey is a questionnaire on the RTA's visibility and if our programs have been effective. To complement and supplement the government's effort to promote our cultural heritage, we have also been working closely with the Ministry of Home and Cultural Affairs and the Ministry of Economic Affairs. Due to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, there has been a conscious move by the royal government to encourage skills development in various fields, including traditional arts, to enable opportunities for self-employment. For this, the RTA works with the Ministry of Labor and Human Resources in the implementation of the weaving programs. Recently, there have been further developments, and I hope to be able to share very positive news in the next few months. Also in the plans is to explore the possibility of including weaving clubs in schools or at the RTA as after-school programs. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Ms. Dorji, for timing it very perfectly with the allocated time and sharing that wonderful national case where you are looking at textile as a medium to perhaps achieve higher goals of education but certainly textile deserves it. But perhaps this could be a model for many other modes of crafts as well. So thank you very much for that. So in the interest of time, let me now move to Dr. Pushpalatha for her presentation. Yeah, over to you.
Let me share the presentation.
Sure.
Respected chairman of the session, other dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, a warm evening to one and all. At the onset, I thank the organizers, especially UNESCO and ICH CAP and banglanadak.com for giving me an opportunity to participate in this program. Let us go directly to the topic, goals of enlarging ICH education, regional differences in diverse indigenous handicrafts in Kerala. In this presentation, I will be giving you a flash on intangible cultural heritage and knowledge system, role of ICH in cultural diversity and sustainable development, why safeguarding ICH and ICH crafts and ICH education. Let us start with the intangible cultural heritage. Intangible cultural heritage includes the practices, representations, expressions, knowledge, and skills, as well as the instruments, objects, artifacts, which are associated with the communities and groups as part of their cultural heritage. As these are strongly associated with their niche, living practices and livelihood activities. To be more specifically, as a general rule, the society, cultural aspects, and the livelihood are almost linked to the living environmental context where the people live in. It can be seen that most of the communities draw on their past or tradition to generate intangible and tangible cultural products, and the continuity of these tradition and cultural heritage is assured by transferring the know-how and the knowledge system to the succeeding generation. Yes, as these are linked with specific communities or groups, niche and environment, living and livelihood practices, the rich heritage and the living legacy is seen varied and diversified on par with the cultural diversity of the specific groups. The diversity of cultures helps the communities of the different ethnic groups to recognize and respect the ways of being. They are not essentially their own. It also fosters creation of civic awareness and local identity, reinforcing a sense of place, thereby enhancing their sense of belongingness and rootedness of different ethnic communities. When we look deep into the traditional crafts, we will be able to understand that ICH crafts have identity of the community. It is associated with the cultural practices of the community, and it always has innate influence of the physical and cultural environment of specific community. The transmission of, and also the transmission of skills and the know-how through generation is essential in order to assure the continuity of these practices. ICH in total, the knowledge, skills, oral traditions, performing arts, social practices, ritual, festive events, traditional crafts are part of intangible cultural heritage, which provides the sense of identity and changes in response to the living environment. Hence, the diversity in ICH crafts too. We know that the craft and art forms of each distinct community have been embedded with the culture and the tradition and have interdependence on their livelihood and ritual practices. It might have some variations in same community in accordance with their geographical and geographic factors where they live in. Yeah, safeguarding ICH in education is one among the several goals of UNESCO's 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Process of safeguarding ICH is a dynamic activity of passing on the knowledge to succeeding generations through interactive process for sustainability of ICH and the community, preventing from becoming obsolete and extinction. Though the ICH knowledge, practices, skills, expressions, artifacts, and art forms are transmitted through generations, this transmission process have been facing several adversities, like too much of impetus on the cultural modernization and globalization by the mainstream of national life, and lack of responsibilities and awareness in younger generation, and also the limited non-availability of community-based education platforms. Now, in order to overcome these limitations, quintessential efforts to conserve and preserve ICH crafts and knowledge system is inevitable. However, this is to be fulfilled by addressing the diverse forms of handicrafts among indigenous groups in Kerala according to their regional specificities, safeguard their cultural heritage. Yeah, as we said, regional specificities have a significant role in safeguarding process of their cultural heritage. As the fast pace of modernization of life and living system takes its toll sidelining the ethnic practices, the scope for building trust and bridging across cultures and regions is becoming all the more difficult. This situation exactly warrants institutional efforts to sustain them intact. Such an effort to get into the regional specificities would be an appreciation of their cultural diversity and the rich sources of knowledge. Identification of such diversities and inculcating them in ICH education would make the content and pedagogy more context specific and culture oriented. Imparting education in this way would ensure the forms of multiple lives in diverse regions are represented in right ways. And different tribal communities in different regions in Kerala possess distinct repertoire of knowledge and know-how of handicrafts. Knowledge and technology, the communities possess always represents their ecology, economic survival, and livelihood options.
Dr. Pushpalatha, I'll have to ask you to speed up.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Tribal communities living in hilly regions, hinterlands, and coastal regions possess knowledge and practices of handicrafts, which is integral to the specificity of that particular region. Let us have a case study of two different communities. Ullada communities, let us see Ullada community. Ullada community is mostly seen in Idukki district of Kerala, and they do hunting and gathering of rooted vegetables for their livelihood. Ullada, the word meaning is interior people, and there are forest dwellers and always depends on forest foods for their living, and their crafts and tools are related to forest dwelling. And also those are the integral of their livelihood. Whereas Ullada community in Alappuzha, Alappuzha is a land of backwaters and coastal life in Kerala. Ullada community in Alappuzha are well-known experts in ferry boat making, which is an integral to their livelihood. Woods widely used for ferry boat making, like punna and anjali trees, are available there in the environment, which are apt for the body of ferry boats. These trees are used for making vallam mainly because they are abundantly available and they have the ability to resist corrosion and fouling. The expertise of the ferry boat making has been transmitted from men of the community to the next generation boys, though they are increasingly become educated. On the other hand, women of the community make floor mat mainly from the leaves of pandanus. Change in the availability of fish and fishing pattern reflects in the change of handicrafts making ferries and fishing tools. The community also compelled to employ mechanized canoes for fishing as the backwaters fishing demanded the motor-powered ferries for meeting the livelihood challenges. Let us see the case of Paniyas in Wayanad. Wayanad is a hilly district of Kerala. Paniyas possess knowledge for making things integral to work in plains, where they depend on agriculture for food and fodders. Whereas the Paniya community living in forest mainly depend on collecting forest foods, products, hunting, meeting the demands of their life. Likewise, there are differences in dressing pattern, choices, taste, and lifestyles, which bring forth the changes in their handicrafts too.
Dr. Pushpalatha, if you may wind up.
Yes, sir. Yes,
We have
sir.
the
This
next
is the
speaker.
last slide. This
Yeah.
is the last
Thank
slide.
you.
In this background, I strongly propose to talk into account of these specificities while designing an educational program on indigenous cultural heritage. Identity and redesigning the program and pedagogy of ICH education is key to make it more nuanced, complex, and richer in content. Such an endeavor would help in making education more engaging, and it would strengthen the sense of belonging. It would also serve to enhance the indigenous livelihood and also preserve and protect the intangible cultural heritage, which has increasingly faced large-scale shifts and transformations. With this, I conclude. Thank you very much for your patient hearing. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Pushpalatha, and sorry for intervening. As I could see that our next speaker has also joined us. So let me now welcome Mr. Talha Ali Kushvaha from Pakistan. And Mr. Kushwaha, I'll ask you to introduce yourself briefly and then continue with the presentations. And you have 8 minutes for yourself. Thank you. Over to Mr.
Thanks very much. Yes, thank you. I am the Executive Director of the National Institute of Folk and Traditional Heritage in Pakistan, based in Islamabad. I'm basically a cultural specialist and an artist. And also I teach culture and history as a course. I think my talk is perhaps not as technical as some would perhaps expect. I have been involved actually with all these ideas of heritage and culture and identity, and especially working with the youth as a teacher. And my impressions have been, and I will of course talk specifically about Pakistan, but also generally, because I think these ideas will apply generally to other countries as well. The idea is that the youth especially has a very, very serious disconnect, a very big disconnect with our culture, heritage, and even history. And all, of course, these are related. And I think that's the result is that the identity, in fact, is also confused most of the times. And of course, in the colonial backdrop of all that is happening, and the education and everything else taken into consideration, the image of heritage, I think, for youth generally is something outdated, something old-fashioned, something perhaps not very useful when it comes to their lives. So heritage is basically something of a novelty, if you will, something that we can perhaps occasionally look in the museums. But heritage has no connection whatsoever with our lives, and this is our youth I'm talking about. So for them, heritage is a dead old elephant, and it is possibly be useful. It could be useful for let's say tourists, aged tourists who want to come and maybe look at and explore heritage, because that is something they're interested in. So older people usually have a use of heritage and history. It's all about science. It's all about so-called modernism, as most people would define it, as a scientific way of living. But unfortunately, heritage is not part of that essential living element. The usefulness of heritage is perhaps something that we need to explore with our youth. because it is not very clear even to older people. I sometimes come across, everyday common people, and for them, heritage is just a way of discovering perhaps what people did a long time back or how they used to live before. But the essential element of identity that heritage gives us, and why identity is important, it's completely lacking, I think, in our education generally. Even when we talk about history and heritage, we do not talk about the essential relationship of identity with that heritage and history. And so the result is the usefulness of heritage is seldom, in fact, it's not talked about at all. That's one thing. So I think what we need to do is to change somehow the image of heritage more than the content of our discourse with the youth. I think the image of heritage needs to be first of all scientific. We need to get this message across to the youth that heritage, there's one science which is in progress, and science is improving every day. So we have one medicine which is useful today, but in 5 years' time, it will not be useful. So that is, of course, science in progress, but heritage is proven science. So the scientific merits of heritage, I think, we've not been able to, at least not in Pakistan, clearly, and I even see other countries. This aspect of heritage is seldom brought to the limelight. So it's not in the foreground. It's not really focused on, and heritage still is considered as something about to tell us who we were, let's say, and how we did things several thousand years back or something. But it's an essential part of and scientific heritage would actually mean, when we say heritage is scientific, that means that it has merits. It has merits for our living. It has merits for our economics. It has merit for our architecture and living. And it has, most of all, merits for the environment. The global warming and the environmental catastrophe that we are now witnessing, and in fact, we're almost there. Very little time is left, and little, I think, is again a very, very optimistic word, because I think we're already on the brink. So we need to also somehow realize, and make youth realize, especially, that the fact that heritage was very scientific and environmentally friendly, and that meant that when we were following, the principles given to us by heritage, when we're using old material, when we're using all those things, the architecture, the way of living, the way of dressing up, all that was in harmony with our climate, with our identity, with our belief system, and most of all with the planet. So this global problem now of environment, I think heritage is most suited, very well placed to tackle that. We talk about zero carbon emission structures, and now we talk about all those things. But again, we need to bring that relationship of heritage and science and identity together. I think what the international community can do, and all of us, I think we need to get together and perhaps cooperate, culturally speaking. We need to not just tell our youth the scientific merits of heritage, but also be able to show them that we have other countries, we have other people, we have youth from other countries following their culture or owning their heritage. And I think it'd be then something which can be reinforced mutually. So if you were to, for example, know that COVID is obviously a problem in terms of travel, physical travel, but whenever that situation gets better, and I'm sure with vaccination, we will get at a stage where we can again start perhaps interacting and traveling a bit. But nevertheless, Zoom, computer, actual travel, exhibitions, all that can be very useful, but we need to involve the youth. For example, the costumes, all those things, if owning that culture and our youth can see other people owning their culture, and similarly, other people can watch us how we are taking heritage forward. I think it'd be worthwhile. Our education, our curriculum needs to incorporate culture more heavily than it is at the moment. And I think, again, I can't emphasize it more, that the scientific merits of heritage, the connection of heritage to our present lives, how it can save energy, how it can be more useful in our comfortable living in low expense related income groups. It can be very useful, but also for the rich, because if rich are responsible, they would not be destroying the environment as they have been doing in the past. And if all that can come together, and I think education, of course, is very important, but parents can do also a better job, and we need to sort of create that awareness and present heritage as a very chic, upper class thing. At the moment, heritage is only for the poor, as I see it. So the zero carbon structures, the poor living in that, the rich couldn't care less. So I think we need to now embarrass the rich and tell them that low carbon emission, for example, is important, not just for the poor, but also for you, because we are, after all, sharing the same planet, whether it is, the countries, the people, the communities, all, I think, need to come together. And by cultural exchanges, by curriculum involving actually other countries' information also. So countries need to, for example, share information.
Mr. Kushwaha, if I may request you to wrap up.
And I think that is the way forward. Yes. Thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kushwaha. Thank you very much. I think you really raised some very critical perspectives for us to think about, that it's not just, doing heritage for the sake of doing heritage, but it has to be scientific. And I think perhaps a rethinking of our discourse is a much needed thing in the education that we are talking about. Thank you very much for that. Now, let me move on to the second part of the discussion by inviting our discussants. And what I would suggest is I will call upon our STEM discussants, and you could introduce yourself briefly. And if you could then touch upon the 4 presentations, if anything is standing, and then also you may reflect on your own experience, and perhaps touch upon the why, how, and what kind of questions related to ICH education, which deals with pedagogy, perhaps the content, but also what is the ultimate goal of the education that we are thinking, as the speakers have just highlighted. So let me call upon our first discussion, Ms. Tushar Khandkar from Bangladesh, the CEO of Colonial Bangladesh. So Ms. Tushar, if you could come on camera and briefly introduce yourself, and then if you could make a brief remarks, and I would request you to keep it to 5 minutes. Thank you.
For offering me this good opportunity to share my experience and my ideas with you. And the discussion I heard very keenly, that is very much important, not only for a certain country, rather I find it is concern of global issues. And as global citizens, we are concerned of the heritage which touches everyday life. And the heritage, it is my experience. I have to introduce first what I am doing. My quarter-century experience in exporting handicrafts to EU and US and Canada. That is my best part to share with you. And then I have been working with CBI, the Netherlands, for last 8 years as consultant of home decor and home textile in Bangladesh. And sometimes I help our communities and our entrepreneurs to grow, to build its capacity as the export potentials I tap, and to help them to grow and to go to the export market. Raw materials and production technique, that is my passion, lifelong passion. So I really engaged with all these issues with my handicrafts producers groups and entrepreneurs in Bangladesh. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, so now let me go to our next discussant, Dr. Gamini Wijesuriya from Sri Lanka. Gamini, if you could briefly introduce yourself and make your remarks. 5 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, Neel. Hello, Navin and others. Thank you, Ananya and the team for inviting me. I know I was a bit of a difficult customer, which is not normal, but great to hear all those case studies. Although they were in line with what I was going to express, but also I heard some words such as experts and education and so on. Therefore, I would like to make a few comments on that. I will start with this remark. There was a meeting. A lot of people are ICOMOS people. You know, ICOMOS has a scientific council, and their first council was held in Rome some years ago, and there was a discussion about, they have a number of scientific committees. They were talking about preparing a list of experts on different subjects, whether it is stone, whether it is wood, whether it is archaeological management, and so on. And they all were talking about, but then the guy from the vernacular heritage got up and said, "I'm sorry, sir, we cannot prepare a list of experts. We are not the experts. Vernacular is the people who are the experts." So let me, with that remark, let me say a few things. Particularly, I'm a bit nervous about this education thing. Maybe I'm wrong, you can explain that. When we start developing World Heritage Capacity Building strategy in 2010, there was a debate about education versus training and capacity building. Professor Logan and I have later written an article on that also, because there were issues. As you know, as you will agree, particularly since you are mostly academics and so on, universities place their role as educating at a higher plane than training and capacity building. In fact, a professor from UK said training is a taboo in their curriculum discussion. So, well, that is acceptable because universities relate to providing largely theoretical-based programs intended to provide for advanced research and skills and profession. In the World Heritage Capacity Building, we explored domains where capacities reside that could support the effective conservation and management of heritage. Accordingly, we identified at least 3 audiences which are also relevant to ICH. Among the audiences were the communities and network, which is particularly relevant to ICH. When speaking about communities, we cannot emphasize only on educating. Indeed, we learn, I think already said, I think Neel very rightly said, and others also highlighted, we learn from them, from the communities, as they possess the capacities to safeguard ICH, particularly regarding crafts. And while recognizing the role as academic institutions promote the discourse on ICH at a different level, I have 3 suggestions handling craft for this discussion. One is to recognize the capacities reside in communities, and to task should be to strengthen their capacities rather than educating when it comes to crafts. And the point 2 is recognize and promote traditional ways of transmitting knowledge, which you heard, and also in the previous session, transmitting knowledge and skills, and promote strengthening them. You have many examples. India must be having a large number of people like Selina who are promoting in situ practices of crafts and what you heard from Nepal, and organized the programs like UNESCO Bangkok, which they said monks project. I don't like the name, but they started this one of the best models to review and develop. It was based on traditional knowledge and knowledge centers. And then, of course, programs like One Village, One Product, like in Thailand and so on, where they had promoted crafts. And then I know India, they have many, many programs, like my colleague Tara Sharma is doing something in Ladakh, very interesting. And all of you highlighted some of them. Last point is, of course, focus on the livelihood of those already engaged, those who are willing to engage in the craft, such as the youth you were talking about, because we do have models in other countries like Japan and Korea. And of course, most important is strengthen their livelihood through microfinances, and most importantly, pension or social benefit schemes for their retirement life and so on, to ensure sustainability and also bring status to their livelihood. That's, I think, my 3 points. And these are my focuses on enlarging the realm of crafts, but no harm in integrating them into ICH education or capacity building, but it is, in essence, it's a local endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gamini. Thank you for that critical remarks. And yeah, as I said, education perhaps could be seen in a multiple ways, not just in a non-linear way. Thanks for bringing that out. And I hope we'll get back to that point, because I think that's really critical. I apologize if I had caught short Madam Tushar Kona, because she introduced, and then I think there was a bit of confusion. So Madam, if you have any few points to add on to what you said before your introduction, you have 2.5 minutes more. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I confused. That's the reason I only introduced me. The main point is the gray part of this discussion, tangible and intangible. I think both are tangible. The heritage, I always find it tangible in everyday life. And when we call it intangible, or always we face the commercial people, we face one kind of conflict with the academia. They think this is something pure, something core of the society. We should not commercialize it. But if it is not integrated with our livelihood, how could it survive? The education, about education, my opinion is very clear. I can refer Mrs. Dorji from Bhutan. She already mentioned that handloom is a dying sector. That's the research result of one Japan survey company. It is true, because the new generation, they are not interested to get into this profession, because this is not sustainable livelihood, nor it is a profession get honor or recognition, and commercial benefit should be there. So I always call it tangible. And what is the heritage? That is the core question. Heritage is raw materials, heritage is technique, not the product. Product can be reshaped, and utility statement will be different age to age. So Moses' basket were there before 4,000 years. The raw materials is there and the technique is there. The use is different. So especially these tropical countries, I think for this region, we have very good source of raw materials that is environment friendly, and we can collect it. From renewable sources. That is the heritage. Procuring the raw materials, it has techniques. Production system that is can be can be other techniques used in production that is also heritage. If we recognize these heritage commercially viable, we can easily integrate this education to technical education. In Bangladesh, I can tell you that our technical education board is there. They are delivering their knowledge and techniques, that is electrician and other technical people are coming from there. It is impossible to introduce this technical knowledge to general education. None will accept it, and we should not push for that. But technical education board can recognize it as a profession, as a trade, and that will deliver impact on two sides. So one, heritage, we will keep it live, and heritage will ensure livelihood. These students will get education, the heritage handed down through generations. But nowadays, one grandmother cannot keep confine their grandchildren that, yes, you come to me and learn these techniques. She must go to school. He must go to school. We cannot discourage them. But the alternative is we should encourage our government, our institutions that recognize it as profession and take steps to integrate this education with mainstream technical education. That's all. I think I already told a lot. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. So I'm glad that I gave you your remaining time. Otherwise, we would have missed that insights that you shared. Very well said. Thank you very much once again. Let me now go to Nepal. Ms. Jayanti Shrestha, Archaeology Officer from the Ministry of Culture, Tourism and Civil Aviation. If you could kindly introduce yourself briefly and then give your remarks. Jayanti Shrestha.
Hello. Namaste, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay. I am Jayanti Shrestha from Nepal. I am working at Ministry of Culture, Tourism and Civil Aviation as an officer. I have been passed master's degree in Tribhuvan University, the subject of archaeology. Let me allow to some few words about the art education in Nepal. Nepal is only the country where visitors can witness stunning natural resources, scenes, cultures, and integral parts of diverse geographical location. Not only is Nepal blessed with the beautiful landscape, such as the Himalayas, river, valley, hills, and plain, but also with its unique culture, arts, and traditions. Culturally and historically rich place of Nepal provide ample opportunity for visitors to explore new places and people. Nepal is well known for the tangible and intangible cultural heritage also. According to the latest scientific survey, Nepal has more than 125 nationalities and 123 national languages with many dialects. People follow, cherish, and take pride in different costumes, cultures, lifestyle, tradition, and faith. The National Constitution 2015 mentioned that every community has rights to celebrate, preserve, and continue its own culture and traditional activities. Nepal ratified 2003 convention, UNESCO convention in 2010. After the ratification, responsible authority, the Ministry of Culture, Tourism and Civil Aviation, has formulated national culture policy in 2011. Nepal government has allocated budget to safeguard and promote intangible cultural heritage as a part of planning and programs. The governments also constitute an apex body, a council, for the promotion and preservation of culture and heritage. Based on National Constitution 2015, Culture Policy 2011, and UNESCO Convention 2003, the ministry has been taking steps through several programs to safeguard intangible cultural heritage. According to 2003 Convention, Article 2, traditional craftsmanship is one of the ICS domain. Therefore, the National Culture Policy has strongly recommended the need to safeguarding our traditional craftsmanship and also address that it should be included in formal and informal education system. We realize that we need to change education and culture policy to fit for changing context. In the past, intergenerational transmission happened in communities as a part of informal education. However, today traditional transmission process is disrupted because children and youth go to school for formal education and degrees. They have virtually no or less time to spend on their traditional skill learning. In Nepal, art education is generally inspired by their respective living tradition. Therefore, the craftsmanship and skill are taught within the family in their own workshop. This approach is in line with the prevailing traditional system for the inter-family and intercaste training of traditional skills, metal craft, wood carving, stone carving, painting, and so on. Traditional handicraft workshop, being a center learning place, is disseminating practical knowledge can still be experienced in Nepal. Institutions such as the Lalit Kala campus of Tribhuvan University have been providing formal arts and craft education. There are also private colleges in this subject area. Also, under the Ministry of Culture, Tourism and Civil Aviation, we have established an Academy of Fine Arts.
Jayanti, you may wrap up, please.
Okay, which has been providing a national and international platform for the promotion of the artists and their art. Finally, with the viewers, I conclude my remarks. Currently, UNESCO Kathmandu is compiling a review project of National Curriculum Frame for the school education, especially focused on ICS, TCS. This frame developed by Government of Nepal has lessons on culture and heritage of Nepal from grade 1 to grade 12. Textbooks have been prepared according to curriculum. UNESCO review will further improve and curriculum with systematic integration is issue related to culture and heritage. Creative and innovative education which focused on art and skill will be part of new curriculum is on this school education. With this good news, I close my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jayanti Shrestha. Now I call upon Ms. Nasima Ahmed from Maldives, Director General of the Way Language Academy. So I will go to Q&A. I noticed some questions in the chat box. Let me begin with that, and then I can have a round of discussions. So Rob has an observation, as you can also see here, that from his experience in Sri Lanka, he says that much of problems is with the fact that the curriculum is imported from the global north, which is irrelevant. However, he also notices that there are some institutes, universities in the region who have pioneered this space. So the question is why and how is it that Indian, and if I can expand it to other South Asian institutes, why and how is it we're able to adapt and embrace relevant towards to the ICT curriculum? So well, I guess he's asking it for the Indian case itself, how the Indian institutes have been able to. So perhaps I can ask Navin to respond to this, if you have some thoughts on this.
It's a very pertinent observation, Rob, and the root of the problem is that the modern education system, the way we see it today, was first introduced and later imposed during the colonial times in India, and somehow we've got just, and I'm basically talking about India, and we've just got stuck to that notion. So just to give you an example, that we have over 400 or over 300 architecture schools, which is a creative industry, and following minimum standards provided by the Council of Architecture. Now it's, I don't know even how to put it, but it's amazing to think that 400 schools working in the creative domain, with at least 200 in each school, about thousands of students across the country thinking and following and adhering to the minimum standards. So we are working with the minimum standards of creativity, and I'm sure that is perhaps also the same with the other. So the need is, and this has been said and discussed at many, the need is really to shut ourselves to this scenario, and have to get back to the drawing board and say, look, where are our roots? And we have to develop an education system that connects to our roots. So my proposition in my PhD was that there should be an undergraduate degree program in traditional Indian architectural system, knowledge systems. Why are we constructing with metal and glass and steel and RCC and the rest of it, which is climatically irresponsible? So if you can have 400 schools who are teaching this, why can't you have another 400 who are teaching traditional Indian knowledge systems? You know, so one has to really look at in a very radical and say that enough is enough. We have to start somewhere, and we have to get down to our roots, and we have to put our indigenous way of thinking, learning, sharing, etc., in our own developed curriculums and methodology. You know, sometimes the curriculum can be exciting, but the way you teach kills it. So the pedagogy itself has to also derive from the indigenous ways of sharing. You know, knowledge was never even a word in the philosophy of Indian education system. It was always knowing. You know, knowledge is static, knowing is evolutionary. You know, those kind of nuances are there.
Thanks, Navin. Thanks for pointing that out. That leads me to another question that is in the chat box, which is from one of the organizers. I mean, this connects to Navin's proposition also, that we'll have to start somewhere. So if we were to consider this discussion, this platform as a starting point, what should be our focus? What should be the priority of a South Asia sub-regional network like this in strengthening ICH education? And I was wondering if I can invite Mr. Talha Ali Kushvaha, because you also gave very critical remarks on what is heritage education. If you could respond to this, what could be our next step from this conversation? Mr. Kushwaha.
Yes, thank you. I think we can do a few things. One is to exchange ideas on curriculum. For example, share what the real experience is of what other countries are doing for heritage and for incorporating heritage in our lives, and how that is related to environment. And we could have case studies and examples of other countries handling environment and modern problems through heritage and through traditions. That's one thing, of course. And then other is to actually have some exchanges, actual student exchanges, where we build and things like that. I think we need to practically incorporate these ideas into students' lives. So while COVID prohibits, I think, somewhat mass level contact, I think we at least can have exchange of information, and then include all countries, or most countries, let's say, who have similar problems or similar issues, should be able to include information from other countries in their curriculum. So, for example, Pakistan can, send out information of how they're handling their problems, of what issues they have, and how heritage and tradition is relevant. And similarly, other countries can do the same. I mean, that's something that comes to my mind. And also have a radical review of all the things being taught at school, and also be able to exchange that in terms of information and how we can handle it.
Thank you, Mr. Kushwaha. Now that leads me to a question. You talked about the inter-country or rather sort of a networked approach. But if I bring it down to the ground, I would like to reach out to Ms. Rinzin Dorji from the Royal Textile Academy in Bhutan. And I would like to bring a question that Gamini asked, and I'd like to rephrase it. In the Royal Textile Academy or institutions of that sort, which is working at the national level, what do you think? Who should be the trainer? Like who is educating whom? If you were to reflect on that, Ms. Dorji, may I invite you? Who has the knowledge? Who gives knowledge to whom?
Well, in terms of our weaving programs, we have experienced weavers who actually have to be trained how to teach, because now we are bringing a technique which was, done very informally, as I mentioned, and now we're trying to put some structure into it. So while we have been operational since 2011, we are still grappling with the curriculum, because weaving is something that doesn't, it's a long-term thing. Whatever you weave is like 2.5 yards long. So to keep the interest of the people is a challenge. And we had to actually downsize our program and make it short-term courses rather than long-term. But we are still not disheartened, because there are several students who come, learn the art, and basically it is practice-based. The weavers need to go back and practice till they just get better and better at the skill. But the fact of the matter is that we have brought in these women and children. They have learned the art, and even if 5% of them continue the art, I think that's an achievement for us. So to answer your question, yes, it is these weavers who don't have formal education, have just learned it informally. They are the ones that we are trying to now develop into full-time teachers. So those are the teachers that we have at the RTA.
That's wonderful to hear, Ms. Dorji, because from my own experience being in the academia, university, I cannot bring in a weaver from Kutch or a craftsperson from Kutch to be a faculty at my institute. And so that's a dilemma I'm personally facing. So what I do in my program is I actually take students to the villages and spend a week or 10 days with them, so that in that space they are the teacher. But unfortunately, the formal academia doesn't allow to have them. I mean, they can be as guest lecturers once in a while, but while I may have a license because I have a degree, that's a dilemma. But very nice to hear from you that in Bhutan you are actually able to implement that through your institution. Now that leads me to a next question, which is again one of these critical questions to think. I would like to go to Dr. Pushpalatha, since you are the UNESCO chair holder, and I believe this is a new UNESCO chair position. What is the content of this ICH education that you are also hinting? Because in your presentation, you touched upon so many of the ICH elements, but what should be the content in that ICH education if your UNESCO chair were to promote? Dr. Pushpalatha, for your remarks.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, please.
Yeah, actually, I have already said that this is only implemented last month of this year, and we are just entering into what we are going to have. And as part of our experience in education field, as we have implemented Institute of Tribal Studies and Research, where we have given education, especially undergraduate and postgraduate program in sociology, where we are planning to train them the ICH education and implement a 1-week workshop in every semester in the program, so that we can make use of these intangible, the crafts and their educations into the younger generation. What we have now is that younger generation doesn't have, knowledge, especially some of the crafts are getting deteriorated and they have obsolescence in current scenario. So we are just trying to educate them their own traditional crafts and teaching and training them along with the course, in the sense along with their semester program, as like a 1 week compulsory training in ICH education. That's what we are planning, sir. And we are also planning to have a ICH Education and Training Center under this UNESCO chair in collaboration or in joining with the government, Kerala government. That's what.
Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pushpalatha. Now that brings me to another question, which I will ask to Madam Tushar Kona, and then I will come to Gamini for the pedagogy question. So to Madam Tushar, I was just thinking, most of this discussion that we're having seems to be thinking of the recipient of the education as a community, which is not necessarily the one that practices. So what would you think, what should be a model of education, or what should be the goal of education that actually benefits the one who does practice, the so-called ICH bearer? So would you have any thoughts on that, Madam Tushar Kona from Bangladesh? You are on mute. Can you?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And in Bangladesh, it is my idea, and I am pushing some of our education ministry officials and other people that if we fail to integrate the craft education, it is not only simple and plain design issue. That Dhaka University or other university, they have their design, art and craft department. They are practicing the ideas of design, but where the natural indigenous knowledge is in the community, and if we cannot make the flow to mainstream working class people, that those who are unemployed, or they think that if we go to garments company and other places, we will get job. So the education should be technical, and it must be integrated to production. And entrepreneur, even entrepreneur will come up from this system. So the whole picture is not still visible before the community, before the policy makers. So indigenous knowledge is there, raw materials are there, product development system is there, and the customers are there. So commercial part is completely ignored if it is not integrated through the mainstream education. That is technical education that I was talking about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I think it has to be somehow connected to the realities on the ground, so that the innovation, the connection to the livelihood issues has to be there. But I was keen to connect to the real beneficiaries, which should not be a very abstract student body somewhere else, but it has to be really connected to the ground. Now that leads me to my next question to Gamini. And by the way, Gamini, I think he didn't introduce himself, so I would take 30 seconds to introduce himself. I think to many of us, he doesn't need an introduction. He is a mentor, he's a great colleague, always working for the idea of living heritage, community participation. These are the core at Gamini's work. Has worked internationally, a very well-known figure, has been associated with ICROM directly, but now is the special advisor to the Director General. So Gamini, my question to you would be, what kind of pedagogy should we be looking at if we are thinking of this ICH education in a reimagined way, as many of you are highlighting, and Navin also has put a comment there. What should be the pedagogy? Because in the typical formal education system, you know, we have some limitations, and I think we need to really crack that box and go out of the box. So I would request your thoughts on that.
Thank you. Thank you. I think Neel, we need to at least temporarily separate. We are talking about ICH in big picture and crafts. I thought this session is focused only on crafts. This is why my comments were sort of universalizing or educating crafting. And it is also partly relates to what Navin has written in this, and also your answer to your question. The ICH education, yes, it can be developed in the university, but when it goes to crafts, my view, what I tried to explain was that it should happen on the ground and it should be locally based, as most of the speakers already said. And people like Navin have been advocating craft-based approach to conservation, which I believe is not something that we teach in the university, but based on the local people, local knowledge, and so on and so forth. So my suggestion is, let's try to at least separate this ICH education and crafts thing, whatever. What I was saying is that let's survey these places where the traditional transmission is taking place, including places like what Dorji was talking about. And then let's take that as the model to promote. That's my view. That's, I think, let's look at new, and let's think of how we can collect these things and they can be shared. I think, Neel, you know, the program was on monks project in Bangkok. I don't like the name, as I said, monks project, but they were based on temples where the knowledge base was, and that was promoting conservation, both tangible and intangible things. And the monks were trained, and the local people were trained, and not trained, of course, I shouldn't be using that word, shared the knowledge, and with the shared knowledge. And then, of course, very importantly, we need to raise the status and standards of those who are engaged in these crafts. Otherwise, you know how it is difficult to find people in Kathmandu after the quake. But unless we think of, because we as white-collar jobs holders, we have a pension after we finish retirement. But have you ever thought what are they going to do after their retirement? They should do that until they die, or do we have things like Japan or Korea, where they are recognized and their livelihood is looked after? I think that's something that should be integrated. So my point is, to answer you, is let's start a new model where we take things from the field itself, like what Dorji has very well explained. Thank you.
Thank you, Gamini. Always wonderful to hear you. Since you mentioned Nepal, and since I'm also from Nepal, and I have Ms. Jayanti Shrestha also from Nepal, let me put this last question to Jayanti as an imagination to think what would be the recipient of all these wonderful things if we were to implement. So Jayanti, if you could kindly share your thoughts in 1 minute. If we come up with a new model of education, whether ICS education, craft education, or something, do you think country like Nepal, which is like country in the South Asia, would benefit? And if so, how? If you have any thoughts on that. In other words, what do you expect a new education to be? Do you have any thoughts, like because you are at the ministry? If you have some thoughts, you may share at this point. Oops, it's still here. Jayanti Shrestha, are you there? I
actually can't see her.
Yeah, I can't see her. All right. Yeah. Otherwise, I was going to ask her. It looks like she might have lost her connection.
Probably.
Yeah. So that's fine. I think we're also running out of time. So that allows me to conclude. Are there any burning comments for 30 seconds any of the panelists would like to make before I conclude the session? Because I don't see any other questions in the chat box except that comment from Navin, which we in some ways touched upon, but that's a good question to follow up. Okay, if there are none, then I think to respect the time. Okay. This has been a wonderful session, and once again, I'm privileged to be listening and having a dialogue with all of you. But really, the idea here was to think, how can we bring in, whether you call it the craft sector or the ICS sector or the heritage sector, which is a sector in itself, very diverse sector, and you have the education sector, which is also a sector of itself, having all kinds of institutions at different level and all that. So the idea was looking at all these cases and all the discussions, the critical comments. How can we imagine an education which integrates these two and perhaps would be beneficial to all of us, not just so-called, licensed teachers, but also the practitioners, students, anybody. And ultimately, if you think through that, and I'm not suggesting that this is a new need, this is an established need, and there have been many efforts from UNESCO to INTACH to INTACH to many universities, to many community groups, in fact, has been doing so. So it's not a new, we're not going to reinvent the wheel, but perhaps the need here was to ask some of these critical questions about why we need some kind of education, what should be the content of the education, and how should we deliver that education, and for whom. If we don't know whom, then I think we are shooting in the dark and without having any results. So rather than reinventing the wheel, the idea was to recognize the wheel, identify the potential, and decide the destination we want to be, rather than just rolling on the wheels to go anywhere. So I think that was the essence that I got from the conversation that we had. But really, since yesterday, the conversations I've been hearing is to build a network. As Mr. Kushwaha also emphasized, that how can we build a network, share our experiences, but not share experiences in a glorified way, but share our failures as well. Because I'm sure we failed. I failed many times. I'm sure all of us failed. So what are the lessons from that failing? How do we move forward? As much as we respect crafts, people and the artisans and all that, I'm sure they also failed, and this is how crafts evolves, so what is the lesson there? So as Madam Tushar rightly said, it's not about that product, it's the process that is the ICS, that is the core of the heritage. So how can our education be conceptualized as a process which actually goes in multiple directions? It works as a contextual education, but perhaps also very collaborative. So there is a tremendous opportunity to really reimagine entire field of education, but also do really good contribution, or really, do justice to our diverse sector of heritage. So I think these are the messages that I'm finding from this discussion. It's a long journey, but I think today has been a good step taken towards this integrated approach. So I'm really happy. I think tomorrow still we have one more day, and I'm sure many things will come, and hopefully in the concluding plenary, we'll have some concrete outcomes of this. And I hope many of us can join and contribute in this discussion. So with very much thanks from my side to all of you for participation, and particularly to the organizers for really thinking through this process and bringing us all together. And I look forward to wonderful collaboration and critical discussions going forward. So with that, I conclude this session, and I will hand it over to Madhura for the next session.
Thank you, Dr. Neel Kamal. So before I thank Dr. Neel Kamal for this wonderful session and this wonderful discussion, I will request all of you to please switch on your cameras so that we can take a group photograph for this session. So I'll request all the speakers to please switch on cameras. Each cap. So each cap here. Yeah, hi. And we had Dr. Gamini here, right? Yes, he's there. He's here. Okay. Yeah. So I'll count 3. 1, 2, 3. Done. Okay. Thank you very much. So first of all, thank you, Dr. Neel Kamal, for this brilliant interaction that we had, and for raising very pertinent questions to specific speakers based on what they shared and what kind of expertise and experiences they have had. I think we got a lot of points that we can, as you said, really incorporate in tomorrow's discussion and rapporteur report. So what is interesting to us here is that in this session, though we are talking about ICH and education, and we are talking with a lot of academicians here, we can actually draw alignment with very concrete points that have come up in the previous sessions, where people have spoken from the industry, from market, from people who specialize in creative economy. So few of the points that actually align very well are, for example, what Rinzin and Mr. Kushwaha, they echoed the same feeling about bringing in youth and making the heritage attractive. So that is the same thing that even the industry people who are in the market are talking about. And so it is not only just the education or not only just the product, it is more than that for making heritage attractive. The other very interesting point that Mr. Kushwaha has been harping on all through, and Dr. Neel Kamal also emphasized, is the scientific aspect of intangible cultural heritage, traditional knowledge, and the fact that we have an advantage over the West in terms of the sustainability aspects that we have. And this is again exactly the conversation that we had in the previous session, where there were again industry specialists and not-for-profit representatives who talked about developing an index of sustainability for strengthening our regional negotiation, for our lowering our carbon footprint and the discussions that we have. And the fact that we have also talked about heritage is a technique and a process, and the fact that that is very important. Yesterday, when Dr. Andrew was introducing, he talked about the finer skills which make capacities complete in terms of having the ICH skills, having the heritage skills, as well as the finer skills to actually build on entrepreneurship. So, and definitely the idea of sharing, exchange, and curriculum sharing, and the reshaping of the pedagogy, which I think are all very, very critical aspects that we will deal with tomorrow. And these will be, these align with the objective of this entire event also. So thank you very much, all of you. To all the speakers, I thank for your time and for your very insightful presentations. And I will request all of you to be there tomorrow, because you have made very interesting and very important points. And with your participation tomorrow, we can really build a strong outcome document which can take our initiatives forward. So thank you so much. Now I will just pass on the mic to Hengju from ICHCAP to finally close.